I think he wants to push this and his other criminal cases back beyond the election because he's hoping that if he's reelected, he can then kind of thwart the cases against him.
And former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty in his Georgia election fraud case, waiving the right to appear in court next week. He's among 19 people charged with a conspiracy to overturn the US state 2020 vote results in Georgia, of course. He turned himself in, didn't he, at Fulton County Jail in Atlanta last week, where he had his mugshot taken. Who could forget? Let's speak to Jennifer Rodgers, legal analyst at CNN and a former federal prosecutor. Jennifer, good evening. What happened today and what role is this in the process?
Well, the former defendant was arraigned today. It's the formal process by which the charges are read to him and he pleads his not guilty. It really starts the clock in a lot of ways. He now has 30 days to try to remove the case to federal court if he wishes to do so. Now the prosecutors will turn over discovery to him and his team, and the judge will think about setting dates like motion schedule dates and ultimately a trial date. So this is not the very beginning, of course, because we knew the grand jury had charged him previously and he was arrested, but in a lot of ways, the beginning of the litigation part of this process.
Okay. He's also been asked to be tried in this separately from the 18 co-defendants. Why is that?
Well, I think he, first of all, wants to push it back as long as possible. I think he wants to push this and his other criminal cases back beyond the election because he's hoping that if he's reelected, he can then kind of thwart the cases against him. So that's really, I think, a big part of it. He doesn't really have a leg to stand on otherwise. Oftentimes defendants want to sever from their co-defendants because they say, listen, I'm one of the low guys on the totem pole and I'm going to be prejudiced by all of this really damaging evidence against my co-defendants. But in this case, when you're the top of the indictment, you don't have that argument. So he doesn't really have a good substantive argument. I just think mostly he wants to be tried alone well after the election.
Okay. We've also heard today from the New York Attorney General and his office saying that there is no shred of doubt that the former president, Donald Trump, inflated his net worth by as much as $2 billion in the course of a year. Are there likely legal ramifications to that?
Yes, well, the New York Attorney General is a woman, Letitia James, and she has alleged in a case that's been going on now for quite a while that he has illegally inflated assets and then depreciated assets when it suited him, like for tax purposes versus trying to get loans and so forth. So this litigation has been going on for a while, but it's set to go to trial fairly soon. And what Tish James in her office is doing now is they're actually seeking a summary judgment. They're seeking an order before trial that says the evidence as a matter of law demonstrates that they have done this and that we would win in the civil litigation. So we just want that ruling in advance. So it's really an interesting move. We all thought that they were just going to proceed to trial. They're trying to get it resolved before that. I think that's unlikely. I think it will go ahead and go to trial. But it's an interesting, pretty bold move on her part.
What are the consequences?
Well, if the judge agrees and issues a summary judgment, that means that that's an order by the court that the Attorney General's office wins. Now it's appealable, but it basically operates as a trial result. It's a ruling by the court that they win, and then you proceed to appeal as opposed to going to trial first and seeing what a jury thinks of the case.
All right. We've also, just another piece of news in the last day or so, one of the sort of self-described organisers of the Proud Boys militia group was given a 17-year prison sentence for his actions on the 6th of January in those that insurrection, as it was, I suppose, on the Capitol. As these sort of convictions start to mount, do they help to frame people's thinking? Do you see this happen when it comes to Donald Trump, who, of course, is a separate issue that he's defending himself against in Georgia, but, of course, connected to the same incident, the same thing, the same problem, the same idea that Donald Trump had lost that election in 2020 and his efforts to try to overturn it. Do you think they will make a difference to Donald Trump?
Well, it's interesting because the way that ultimately these cases against Trump, the criminal cases, have been charged, they don't include the insurrection on January 6th. There were possible criminal charges that could have been brought that would be about that, and prosecutors chose not to do it. So it's not directly related that all of these, more than 1,000 criminal defendants have been charged and hundreds have been convicted. Some now, as you mentioned, are getting very long sentences. That doesn't necessarily suggest that people will think, well, clearly this happened. Clearly it was serious. Clearly people going to prison for a long time. Donald Trump should too, because he's not charged with the same thing. But it does, I think, start to hopefully seep into people's general consciousness about this was a big deal. This was really something. This notion of just, I'm going to overturn this election and there won't be consequences. We saw the culmination of his efforts to overturn the election, and that is what happened on January 6th. So, I do think and hope that to the extent people say, wow, there are serious consequences for this, and this all started with this big lie about the election and so on, that maybe it kind of has that sort of tangential effect.